The emergency klaxons screamed through the diplomatic station orbiting Centauri Prime, their piercing wail cutting through the usual hum of multi-species cooperation. Commander Zarathex of the Velcrin Empire felt her twin hearts skip simultaneously as the red lights bathed the corridors in crimson panic. In her 3 decades of diplomatic service, she had never heard that particular alarm. It was reserved for only one scenario. One that made even the most battle-hardened warriors go pale beneath their scales. The cubs were missing. Not just any cubs, but the offspring of Ambassador Krell Nax, the supreme matriarch of the Velcrin Council. 2 tiny balls of fur and mischief, barely 6 months old, who represented the future of one of the galaxy's most powerful military dynasties. Their disappearance wasn't just a security breach. It was a potential act of war. Zarathex sprinted toward the command center, her clawed feet clicking against the metal flooring. Around her, security personnel from a dozen different species scrambled to their posts. The Velcrin were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick gray hide, powerful limbs, and faces that resembled Earth's long-extinct rhinoceros. They were feared across the galaxy for their military might and their fierce protection of their young. The disappearance of cubs under diplomatic protection would be seen as an unforgivable insult. The command center was already in chaos when she arrived. Holographic displays flickered with security footage, heat signatures, and station schematics. Officers shouted coordinates and status reports. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Krell Nax herself, a towering figure of barely controlled rage. Her massive frame vibrated with tension, and her small eyes, usually warm when looking at her children, now burned with a fury that made seasoned soldiers step back. "Commander." The ambassador's voice was surprisingly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Explain to me how my cubs vanished from a supposedly secure residential wing." Zarathex straightened her spine. "Ambassador, we're reviewing all security footage now. The cubs were last seen in the recreational area at 1400 hours. They were playing near the observation window with the other diplomatic children. And now, we've sealed all docking bays. No ships have left the station in the past 2 hours. We're conducting deck-by-deck searches." A tactical officer, a insectoid Threx named Click-23, swiveled his head toward them. "Commander, I have the footage from the recreational area." The main display enlarged, showing a bright, cheerful room filled with toys and climbing structures. Various species' offspring played together under the watchful eyes of their caretakers. The 2 Velcrin cubs, Mira and Kess, were distinctive with their gray-blue fur and oversized ears that they would eventually grow into. They tumbled and wrestled with each other near a pile of soft blocks, making the chirping sounds that Velcrin young used before they could speak. "Fast forward to the point they leave the caretaker's supervision," Zarathex ordered. The footage accelerated. Other children came and went. Then, at timestamp 1523, both cubs suddenly perked up, their ears swiveling towards something off-camera. They looked at each other with that peculiar intensity young creatures have when they've made a mutual decision, then toddled toward the eastern exit. "Where does that corridor lead?" Ambassador Krell Nax demanded. "Residential quarters for the human delegation," Click-23 answered, his mandibles clicking nervously. A heavy silence fell over the command center. The humans were the newest species to join the Galactic Council, arriving only 5 years ago with their primitive but surprisingly effective fusion drives. They were strange creatures, these humans. Physically weak compared to most species, lacking natural weapons or armor. Yet they had somehow managed to achieve space travel despite their world's heavy gravity and volatile climate. They were also unpredictable, guided by emotions and abstract concepts that confounded the more logical species. "Show me," the ambassador growled. The footage switched to the corridor camera. The cubs waddled down the hallway with the determination only toddlers possess, making their chirping calls to each other. They passed several doors before stopping at one marked with human script. The door was slightly ajar. Unusual but not unprecedented in the residential quarters, where diplomats often kept their doors open during the day. The cubs looked at each other again, then squeezed through the gap. "That's Ambassador Chen's quarters," Zarathex said, checking her datapad. "He's the human agricultural specialist. Joined the delegation 3 months ago." Why would my cubs enter a human's quarters? The ambassador asked, though her tone had shifted slightly from rage toward confusion. Unknown, ma'am. Humans are. They're an enigma to most of us. Their behavior patterns don't always follow logical protocols. Click 2-3 spoke up again. I've been monitoring the corridor since the cubs entered. They haven't come out. The human hasn't left either. His biological signature is still inside. Ambassador Krellnax's massive hands clenched into fists. Has there been any communication? Any demands? Nothing, Ambassador. The human's communication panel shows no outgoing messages. Then we go in, the ambassador said flatly. Prepare a security team. Zarathex held up a hand cautiously. Ambassador, with respect, perhaps a diplomatic approach first? The humans are sensitive about armed incursions into their private spaces. They have concepts of privacy that border on the obsessive. My cubs are likely safe, Zarathex interrupted gently. If this were a kidnapping, we would have heard demands. The human hasn't tried to leave or communicate with anyone. Whatever is happening in there, it doesn't follow the pattern of a hostile action. The ambassador's breathing was heavy, visible clouds of steam rising from her nostrils. Every instinct she had screamed to smash down that door and retrieve her children. But she hadn't risen to her position by acting on instinct alone. You have 5 minutes to make contact, she finally said. After that, I'm bringing my cubs home my way. Zarathex nodded and immediately opened a communication channel to Ambassador Chen's quarters. The signal connected, but there was no response. She tried again. Still nothing. The communication system is functioning, Click 2-3 reported. He's just not answering. Can we get audio from inside the room? Zarathex asked. Negative. The humans installed additional privacy shields in their quarters, something about their cultural expectations. We can only read biological signatures. What do those signatures tell us? Click 2-3's antennae twitched as he studied his display. 3 life forms. 2 Velcrin juvenile signatures, elevated but within normal parameters for active cubs. 1 human adult signature, also normal. Actually, he tilted his head. The human's stress hormones are quite low. Almost like he's resting. Resting? Ambassador Krellnax's voice rose. My cubs are in there and he's resting? 2 minutes have passed. Click 2-3 noted. Zarathex made a decision. I'm going to the door. I'll attempt contact directly. She left the command center at a run, her mind racing through everything she knew about humans. They were social creatures, highly so. They formed bonds easily, sometimes with other species, even with non-sentient animals on their homeworld. They had a strange concept they called cuteness that seemed to trigger protective instincts toward small creatures with large eyes and certain proportional features. Cubs with oversized ears and big eyes. An idea began forming in her mind, one that seemed too simple to be true. When she reached Ambassador Chen's door, she paused. From inside, she could hear something. A low, rhythmic sound. Was that humming? She pressed the communication panel beside the door. Ambassador Chen, this is Commander Zarathex. I need to speak with you urgently. Creedy. Silence. Then the humming stopped. A moment later, a voice came through the speaker, barely above a whisper. Commander? Is something wrong? The voice was careful, quiet. Why would he be speaking so softly? Ambassador Chen, I need you to open this door. I can't right now. This is urgent, Ambassador. We have a code red situation. A long pause. Commander, I understand this is going to sound strange, but I need you to trust me for about 20 more minutes. Nothing is wrong. Everything is fine, but I absolutely cannot move right now. Back in the command center. Ambassador Krellnax listened to this exchange with growing confusion and anger. What does he mean he can't move? Is he injured? Under duress? Click 2-3 checked his readings again. His biological signs indicate no distress, Ambassador. Actually, his serotonin levels are quite elevated. That's usually associated with contentment or happiness in humans. My cubs are in there and he's content? The ambassador's voice could have cut through hull plating. Commander, you have 30 seconds to open that door, or I'm coming through it. Zarathex knew that wasn't an idle threat. Ambassador Chen. The cub's mother is here and she's understandably concerned. I need you to give me something. Any explanation that will help this situation. Another pause. Then a soft sigh came through the speaker. All right. But you have to promise to be very, very quiet when you come in. No sudden movements, no loud noises. Can you do that? Zarathex exchanged a glance with her communication device, knowing the ambassador was listening. Agreed. The door is unlocked. Come in slowly, and I mean slowly. She placed her hand on the door control, her other hand resting on her sidearm just in case. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dimmed interior of the human's quarters. The room was modestly furnished, with the strange mix of technology and natural elements humans seem to prefer. Plants, actual living plants, sat in containers near the window. A desk covered with data pads sat in one corner. And there, on a broad piece of human furniture they called a couch, was Ambassador Chen. And the cubs? Zarathex froze, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Ambassador Chen was lying back against the cushions, his face peaceful, his eyes tired but warm. On his chest, curled up like little furry stones, were Mira and Kess. They were deeply asleep, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. One of Chen's hands rested gently on Mira's back, while the other supported Kess. Both cubs had their tiny paws tucked under their chins, and occasionally they would make soft snuffling sounds. The human looked up at Zarathex and put a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. Then he whispered, "They just fell asleep about 10 minutes ago." I didn't want to wake them. Zarathex activated her communicator, keeping her voice barely audible. Ambassador Krell-Nax, you need to see this yourself. But you must come alone, and you must be silent. Commander, if this is... Please, Ambassador, trust me. 3 minutes later, the massive form of Ambassador Krell-Nax filled the doorway. She had to duck to enter, her bulk making the human quarters seem suddenly small. Her eyes immediately locked onto her cubs, and Zarathex saw the ambassador's entire body language shift from aggressive to confused to something approaching wonder. She moved forward with a delicacy that seemed impossible for a creature her size, each step carefully placed. When she was close enough to see her cubs' sleeping faces, she stopped completely. Ambassador Chen looked up at her and smiled softly. "They wandered in while I was working," he whispered. "I think they were curious about the plants. They started climbing on the couch, and then one of them just climbed onto my lap. The other followed. Before I knew it, they were asleep. I've been afraid to move ever since. Creasy, ANDA, ever will, ANDA, ANDA. Ambassador Krell-Nax stared at him, then at her cubs, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "You've been sitting there, perfectly still, for over an hour? Has it been that long?" Chen glanced at the chronometer on the wall. "I guess it has. I was afraid if I moved, they'd wake up. They seemed so peaceful. Why didn't you contact anyone? My communicator is on the desk over there. I couldn't reach it without disturbing them." He looked almost embarrassed. "I know it probably seems silly, but where I come from, there's this unwritten rule. When something falls asleep on you, especially something young and innocent, you don't move. You just don't. No matter how uncomfortable you get." Ambassador Krell-Nax tilted her massive head, studying this strange human who had inadvertently caused a station-wide emergency by being too considerate to wake her sleeping cubs. The cubs who had, for reasons she still didn't understand, chosen this alien's chest as their napping spot. "They have never," she said slowly, "chosen to sleep with anyone outside our family group." Chen looked down at the cubs with genuine affection. "I'm honored then. They're beautiful, Ambassador. You must be very proud." And somehow, in that moment, watching this small human cradling her cubs with such obvious care, speaking with such simple sincerity. Ambassador Krelnax felt something shift in her understanding of these strange creatures. The news of what had happened spread through the diplomatic station like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours, every delegation knew that the Velcrin cubs had been found safely sleeping on a human ambassador. The reactions varied dramatically depending on the species and their understanding of humans. The Threks found it logically confusing. Why would predator-descended cubs trust a member of an unknown species so completely? The mathematics of survival didn't support such behavior. The Zephians, who communicated primarily through color changes in their translucent bodies, flickered with amusement and curiosity. The Draconians, proud reptilian warriors who often competed with the Velcrin for military contracts, were openly skeptical, suggesting the whole thing had been staged for political purposes. But in the human quarters of the station, the reaction was entirely different. James Chen sat in the small common area shared by the human delegation, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. Around him, his fellow humans were in various states of amusement and concern. "You caused a code red," Ambassador Patricia Okonkwo said, though her stern expression was undermined by the smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "A station-wide emergency. Ships scrambled. Warriors ready to tear the place apart." "I know," James said miserably. "I wasn't thinking. They were sleeping. They felt safe. How could I disturb that?" Dr. Marcus Webb, the delegation's xenobiologist, was grinning openly. "Mate, you've just become the first human in recorded history to be trusted as a napping spot by Velcrin cubs. Do you understand how significant that is? The Velcrin are one of the most protective species in known space. They barely trust their own extended families with their young." "I still can't believe you didn't at least try to reach your communicator," Patricia said. "You had to have known people would be looking for them." James shrugged helplessly. "Have you ever had a kitten fall asleep on you? Or a puppy? You don't move. It's an unwritten law of the universe. They're not kittens, James. They're the offspring of one of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. They're babies," James countered quietly. "Doesn't matter what species, babies need to feel safe, and if they felt safe enough with me to sleep, then I wasn't going to betray that trust by making them think they'd chosen wrong." Sarah Kim, the delegation's cultural liaison, was watching James with thoughtful eyes. "That's very human of you, James. But you need to understand that not all species think that way. Most species see their young as the next generation of their people, important for survival and legacy. Humans see babies, and something else happens in our brains. The cuteness response," Dr. Webb interjected. "It's evolutionary. Big eyes, small features, helplessness, all trigger our protective instincts. We're hardwired to want to care for vulnerable young, even if they're not our own species." "Is that unusual?" James asked. "Very," Sarah said. "Most species have strong instincts to protect their own young, but humans extend that instinct across species boundaries with unusual enthusiasm. We domesticated dozens of species on Earth. We keep animals as companions, treat them like family members. We cry over fictional animals in stories. It's actually one of the things that makes other species nervous about us." "Why would that make them nervous?" Patricia leaned forward. "Because it's unpredictable, James. The Velcrin can understand protecting your own cubs because they're your genetic legacy. They can't quite understand protecting something because it's cute or because it trusts you. Those aren't logical survival traits." "So what happens now?" James asked. Before anyone could answer, the door chimed. Patricia rose to answer it, and the room fell silent as Commander Zarathex entered. Her posture formal, but not hostile. "Ambassador Chen," she said, her voice carrying the translator's neutral tones. "Ambassador Krelnax requests your presence in the Velcrin quarters." James felt his stomach drop. Am I in trouble?" Something that might have been amusement flickered in Zarathex's eyes. "That remains to be determined. But the ambassador has made it clear that the invitation is not optional." The walk through the station's corridors felt longer than it should have. James was acutely aware of the stares from various species as they passed. Word had clearly spread, and he was now apparently noteworthy. He wasn't sure he liked it. The Velcrin quarters were in the high-gravity section of the station, where the floors were reinforced and the ceilings higher to accommodate their size. James felt the increased pull as soon as they entered the section, his legs working harder with each step. Humans had evolved on a heavy-gravity world, which was part of why they were so dense and muscular compared to many other species. But the Velcrin had evolved on a world that made Earth look gentle. The ambassadors' quarters were impressive, decorated with what James assumed were cultural artifacts from the Velcrin homeworld. Woven tapestries showing battle scenes hung on the walls. A massive desk dominated one corner, covered with datapads and holographic displays. And in the center of the room, on a pile of cushions that looked like they'd been imported from the homeworld, Ambassador Krelnax sat with her cubs. Mira and Kess were awake now, tumbling over each other in play. When they saw James enter, both cubs froze. Their oversized ears perked up, and they made soft chirping sounds. "Sit," Ambassador Krelnax commanded, gesturing to a cushion across from her. James sat, trying not to show how intimidated he felt. The ambassador was even more imposing in her own space. Every inch, the warrior diplomat who commanded respect across the galaxy. For a long moment, she simply studied him with her small, intense eyes. Then she spoke. "My cubs like you." James wasn't sure if that was a question or an accusation. I like them too, Ambassador. They're wonderful. Do you understand what happened today? What it means in my culture? I'm beginning to understand that it was significant. I apologize for not communicating. I should have found a way to let someone know where they were. Yes, you should have, the ambassador agreed. But that's not what I'm asking about. I want to know if you understand what it means that they chose you. James shook his head slowly. The ambassador leaned forward slightly. The Velcrin are warriors, Ambassador Chen. We have been since before we reached the stars. Our history is written in battles, fought, and won. Our cubs are raised from birth to be strong, to be fierce, to be survivors. We teach them early to assess threats, to know friend from foe. She paused, watching as Mira toddled over to James and placed her small paws on his knee, looking up at him with curious eyes. Cubs at this age, the ambassador continued, operate on pure instinct. They cannot yet be taught who to trust. They simply know. And they have never, in our recorded history, chosen to sleep with someone who was not family, not even trusted family friends, not even other Velcrin who have known them since birth. James gently stroked Mira's head, marveling at how soft her fur was. Why do you think they trusted me? That, Ambassador Krelnax said slowly, is what I've been trying to understand. Commander Zarathek sent me the security footage. I watched you before my cubs entered your quarters. You were working on agricultural reports. Very boring material. Despite the tension, James smiled slightly. It was pretty dry. Yes. And then, my cubs arrived. You looked surprised, confused, but not afraid, and not annoyed. You let them explore. You showed them your plants. When they climbed onto your furniture, you didn't shoo them away. You accepted their presence. They were curious. It seemed rude to deny them that. And when they climbed onto you, I was honored, James said simply. Being trusted by a child, any child, is a privilege. I wasn't going to treat it lightly. Ambassador Krelnax was quiet for a long moment. Kess had now joined her sister, and both cubs were trying to climb into James's lap. He adjusted his position to help them, supporting them carefully. My people have known many species, the ambassador finally said. We have allied with some, fought others, coexisted with most. But humans continue to puzzle us. You are weak by galactic standards. Your ships are primitive. Your weapons are basic. You have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. By all logical measures, you should not have survived your own evolution, much less reached the stars. We had other advantages, James said quietly, still focused on the cubs. We learned to cooperate, to adapt, to see potential in unlikely places. Yes, the ambassador agreed. But there's something else. Something we're only beginning to understand. You bond with things that are not your own. You extend empathy in directions that make no evolutionary sense. You cry at stories. You keep animals that serve no purpose except companionship. You risked a diplomatic incident because you didn't want to wake sleeping cubs that aren't your species, your responsibility, or your concern. She leaned back, her massive frame settling into the cushions. Commander Zara Thex has been studying your species extensively. She shared something with me today. She told me that on your homeworld, you have a word, cute. Is this correct? Yes, Ambassador. Explain it to me. James thought carefully about how to translate something so fundamentally human. Cuteness is. It's a response we have to certain features. Large eyes relative to head size. Small proportions. Certain behaviors. It triggers an instinct in us to protect and nurture. Scientists think it evolved to make us want to care for our own young, who are incredibly helpless compared to most species. But it doesn't turn off for other species. If something has those features, we respond to it. My cubs have large eyes, small proportions. Yes, James admitted. To a human, they would be considered extremely cute. And this makes you want to protect them? Yes. Even though I understand intellectually that they're not human babies, that they don't need my protection, that they have a very capable mother who would destroy anyone who threatened them. He smiled ruefully. The instinct doesn't really care about logic. Ambassador Krelnax made a sound that the translator couldn't quite interpret. It might have been laughter. Humans are very strange, Ambassador Chen. I'm beginning to realize that's a common observation. But perhaps, the ambassador continued, that strangeness has value. Perhaps the galaxy needs species that see a vulnerable creature and think, I must protect this, rather than, how can this benefit me? Perhaps there is strength in that kind of weakness. She stood, her full height impressive even in the large room. James started to stand as well, carefully holding the cubs. No, she said, stay seated. There's something else I must tell you. James settled back down, Mira and Kess now comfortable in his lap. What happened today, the ambassador said, will have consequences. The Velcrin Council will hear about this. They will want to understand how and why my cubs trusted you. Some will be skeptical. Some will be hostile to the idea that a human could be chosen by Velcrin young. Do you understand? I think so, Ambassador. But there is something else you should know. In my culture, if cubs choose someone outside the family as safe, as trustworthy, as worthy of their vulnerability, that person becomes what we call a den friend. It's an old tradition, rarely invoked in modern times. It means you have been accepted as part of our protection circle. James felt the weight of what she was saying, even if he didn't fully understand it. What does that mean, practically? It means that you have a responsibility now, Ambassador Chen. My cubs have given you their trust. That is not something my people take lightly. It also means that my family has a responsibility to you. We protect our own, and now, whether you intended it or not, you are counted among that number. Before James could respond, the door chimed. Commander Zarathex entered, her expression urgent. Ambassador, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation developing in the council chambers. Several ambassadors are demanding a formal inquiry into today's events. Ambassador Krelnax's expression hardened. Which ambassadors? The Draconian delegation, primarily. Ambassador Thexlar is arguing that the incident represents a security failure, and that the human delegation should be restricted to their quarters pending investigation. James felt his heart sink. This was becoming much bigger than he had anticipated. They're using this as an excuse, the ambassador said coldly. The Draconians have been looking for any opportunity to undermine human standing in the council. They see your species as competitors. What do we do? James asked. Ambassador Krelnax's small eyes glittered with something that might have been anticipation. We go to the council chambers. We face this directly, and we show them exactly what happened and why. She looked down at the cubs in James's lap. Bring them. Bring the cubs? To the council chambers? Yes, the ambassador said with absolute certainty. Sometimes the best argument is not words, but demonstration. If the council wants to understand what happened, let them see for themselves. The council chambers were designed to accommodate the full diversity of galactic species. The ceilings soared 50 feet high to give room for the winged Etherian representatives. The temperature zones varied by section, with heating elements for the cold-blooded saurians and cooling systems for the methane-breathing cricks. The viewing galleries could hold thousands, and today they were packed with observers from every delegation on the station. James Chen walked beside Ambassador Krell-Nax, very aware that every eye in the massive chamber was upon them. He carried Mira while the ambassador carried Kess. The cubs seemed fascinated by the enormous space, their heads swiveling to take in the lights and the crowds. The Galactic Council operated on principles of consensus and diplomacy, but beneath the civilized surface, it was still very much about power. The species with the strongest militaries, the most resources, or the most strategic territory held more sway. The Velkrin were a major power. The Draconians were their primary rivals, and the humans were the unpredictable newcomers that no one quite knew how to classify yet. Ambassador Thexlar of the Draconian Empire stood in his delegations section, his scaled form impressive in its own right. The Draconians were reptilian beings with wing membranes they could no longer use for true flight, remnants of their evolutionary past. They prided themselves on logic, strategy, and military precision. The emergency session is called to order, announced Speaker Velnoth, a Zephian whose body pulsed with neutral purple hues. Ambassador Thexlar has raised concerns about security protocols following today's incident. Ambassador Thexlar, you may present your argument. The Draconian stepped forward, his movements calculated and precise. Honored council members, today we witnessed a complete breakdown of security protocols. 2 Velkrin cubs, offspring of a council member, disappeared from supervised care and were found in the private quarters of a human ambassador. No alarm was raised by the human. No communication was made. For over an hour, the cub's location was unknown, causing a station-wide emergency. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. I have no doubt that Ambassador Chen meant no harm. However, this incident reveals dangerous gaps in our security procedures, particularly concerning the newest members of our council. The humans have been with us only 5 years. Their culture is still largely unknown to us. Their decision-making processes are unpredictable. I move that we implement stricter protocols for human interaction with the offspring of other species until we better understand their behavioral patterns. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Some species nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. The human's unpredictability is precisely the issue, Thexlar continued. Ambassador Chen claims he didn't move because he didn't want to disturb the sleeping cubs. This is not logical behavior. The rational action would have been to contact security immediately. The fact that he chose comfort over protocol suggests poor judgment at best, and at worst, indicates that humans cannot be trusted to make appropriate decisions in critical situations. Ambassador Patricia Okonkwo rose from the human delegation section. Speaker Velnoth, may I respond? The speaker's colors shifted to allow her to speak. Ambassador Thexlar's concerns would be valid if his characterization of events were accurate, Patricia said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. But he's fundamentally misunderstanding what occurred. Ambassador Chen didn't fail to act rationally. He acted according to a deeper principle that my species holds, one that I believe deserves explanation rather than condemnation. She gestured to where James stood with the cubs. Humans have an evolutionary trait that many species find puzzling. We form protective bonds with vulnerable creatures, even across species lines. This isn't a weakness or a failure of logic. It's one of the primary reasons we survived our own evolution and reached the stars. Our ability to cooperate, to extend trust and care beyond our immediate genetic family, allowed us to form the complex societies that eventually led to space travel. Interesting philosophy, Thexlar countered, but philosophy doesn't excuse security breaches. There was no breach. Ambassador Krell-Nax spoke, her deep voice silencing the murmurs instantly. My cubs were never in danger. They were never distressed. In fact, They were exactly where they chose to be. With respect, Ambassador, Thexlar said. They are cubs. They cannot make informed choices. Can they not? Ambassador Krelnax stepped forward, and the crowd parted instinctively before her massive form. You speak of logic, Ambassador Thexlar. Then let us apply logic. My species has existed for over 3 million years. We have survived because our cubs have excellent instincts for detecting threats. It is built into our genetics. Cubs who could not sense danger did not survive to pass on their genes. My cubs chose to approach Ambassador Chen. They chose to remain with him. They chose him as a safe place to sleep. They're babies, Thexlar argued. They went to him out of curiosity, nothing more. Then let us test your theory. Ambassador Krelnax said. If my cubs respond to all species equally, if their choice meant nothing, then they should be equally comfortable with you. Approach us, Ambassador. Hold out your hands. Let us see if they come to you. A tense silence fell over the chamber. Thexlar's eyes narrowed. This is not necessary. On the contrary, Ambassador Krelnax said, her tone making it clear this was not a request. It is completely necessary. You question the meaning of my cub's choice. You suggest their actions were random, meaningless. Prove it. Show the council that any being could have served the same purpose. The speaker's colors flickered with uncertainty. This is highly irregular. So is accusing a species of being unfit for council interaction based on an act of kindness, Ambassador Krelnax countered. Ambassador Thexlar, I am giving you an opportunity. If you are correct, if my cub's choice meant nothing, then they will come to you just as readily as they went to Ambassador Chen. And if they do, I will personally support your motion for stricter protocols. Thexlar looked trapped. To refuse would be to admit his argument had no merit. To accept risked public rejection by the cubs, which would undermine his position even more thoroughly. Finally, he stepped forward, his movements stiff. He stopped several feet from where James stood with Mira. Slowly, carefully, he extended his clawed hands toward the cub. Mira looked at him. Her ears flattened against her head. She made a sound James hadn't heard before. A low growl that seemed impossible for something so small. Then she turned away from Thexlar completely, burying her face against James's chest. Perhaps the other one, Thexlar said, his voice tight. Ambassador Krelnax gently set Kess on the ground. Go on, little one. The ambassador wants to meet you. Kess looked at Thexlar. Then she looked up at James. Without hesitation, she waddled straight to James and wrapped herself around his leg, clinging like her life depended on it. The message was unmistakable. The entire council chamber witnessed it. The cubs had made their choice. And it wasn't the logical, military-minded draconian. It was the human who had sat still for over an hour rather than disturb their sleep. Thexlar stepped back, his scales flushing darker with what might have been embarrassment. This proves nothing. They've been with him longer now. They've formed a temporary attachment. Have they? Ambassador Krelnax turned to address the full council. Or have they recognized something in this human that you fail to see? My people have a saying. Cubs see with the heart, before the eyes. They don't understand politics. They don't care about military strength or strategic alliances. They respond to what is genuine. And they saw something genuine in Ambassador Chen. Dr. Webb rose from the human delegation. Speaker, if I may add some scientific context. The speaker's colors shifted permission. I'm a xenobiologist, Dr. Webb said. I've studied the evolution of protective instincts across multiple species. What makes humans unusual isn't that we protect our young. Most species do that. What makes us unusual is that we've evolved to extend those protective instincts across species boundaries. We domesticated dozens of species on our homeworld. We formed symbiotic relationships with creatures that, by all logic, should have remained separate from us. He walked closer to the center of the chamber. This trait made us vulnerable in many ways. We wasted resources on creatures that didn't directly benefit our survival. We formed emotional attachments that could be exploited, but it also gave us advantages that more logical species overlooked. We learned to read the emotions and needs of other species. We became exceptional at forming alliances. We developed empathy as a tool for understanding and cooperation. The Velcrin cubs responded to this. Dr. Webb continued. They sensed in Ambassador Chen something their instincts recognized as safe, not because he's strong or powerful, but because he genuinely cares about vulnerable creatures, even when those creatures aren't his own species, his own responsibility, or his own concern. That's not a security risk, Ambassador Thexlar. That's exactly the kind of trait we should value in council members. Another ambassador rose, this one a Threx named Scholar 7. I have been observing the humans since they joined the council. I find myself agreeing with Dr. Webb's assessment. The humans are unpredictable, yes, but their unpredictability stems from their emotional reasoning, not from malice or incompetence. In my calculations, species that rely purely on logical decision-making often miss creative solutions that emotional reasoning can provide. Emotions are weaknesses to be exploited, Thexlar argued, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Are they? Ambassador Krelnak said. I built my career on logic and military strategy. I trusted no one outside my own people. I saw emotions as liabilities, and yet today, my cubs taught me something I had forgotten. They reminded me that trust has value beyond calculations. That sometimes the strongest bonds are formed not through logic, but through simple, genuine care. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various ambassadors. Ambassador Chen could have moved. He could have contacted security. He could have done the logical thing. But he chose instead to honor the trust my cubs placed in him. He chose their comfort over his own. That is not weakness, that is strength of a different kind, and perhaps it is strength that the council needs. Speaker Velnoth's colors shifted to a deep blue, indicating contemplation. This session has raised important questions about how we evaluate the behavior of different species. Ambassador Thexlar, do you wish to proceed with your motion? Thexlar looked around the chamber. He could read the room as well as anyone. The mood had shifted. What he had intended as an indictment of human unpredictability had instead become a demonstration of a different kind of value. I withdraw my motion, he said finally. But I maintain that protocols should be reviewed to prevent future incidents. A reasonable compromise, the speaker agreed. This session is adjourned. However, I think we all have much to consider about what we witnessed here today. As the council members began to disperse, James found himself surrounded by ambassadors from various species, all wanting to meet the cubs or ask questions about human behavior. Mira and Kess handled the attention with remarkable patience, though they never left James's immediate vicinity. Commander Zarathex approached with what might have been a smile. You've become quite famous, Ambassador Chen. I suspect you'll be receiving many questions about human customs in the coming weeks. I'm not sure I can explain it, James admitted. I just did what felt right. That, Zarathex said, may be the most human statement I've ever heard. Later, after the crowds had dispersed and the excitement had died down, James found himself back in Ambassador Krelnax's quarters, watching Mira and Kess play. The ambassador sat beside him, her massive form at rest. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for today, but for showing me something I had forgotten. In my rise through military ranks, I learned to trust only strength and strategy. I taught my cubs to be strong, to be fierce, to be cautious. But you showed them something else. You showed them that gentleness can also be strength. That trust can exist without calculation. I didn't mean to cause such a commotion, James said. I know. That's part of why it mattered. You didn't act for political gain or strategic advantage. You acted because a being needed kindness. And you provided it without question. She watched her cubs tumbling over each other. The den-friend bond is real, Ambassador Chen. You are now part of my family's protection circle. That means something among my people. I'm honored, truly. You should also know, she continued, that this will complicate your life. Other species will want to understand how you achieved this. Some will see it as weakness. Others will see it as a skill to be learned. The Draconians will likely test you, trying to prove that emotions can be exploited. I can handle complications. I believe you can. She stood, moving to a cabinet and retrieving something wrapped in cloth. This is for you. A gift and a symbol. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a medallion of worked metal, inscribed with symbols James couldn't read. This is a Den Friend marker. It's old, passed down through my family for generations. Wear it, and any Velcrin who sees it will know you are under my family's protection. More importantly, they will know you have been chosen by our young. That carries weight in our culture. James accepted the medallion with reverent care. I don't know what to say. Say you'll remember what you taught my cubs today. Say you'll remember that sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting or fleeing, but simply sitting still and honoring trust. She placed one massive hand gently on his shoulder. The galaxy needs more of that kind of courage, Ambassador Chen. Don't let anyone convince you it's weakness. As James made his way back to the human quarters later that night, the medallion heavy against his chest, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd come to this station expecting to negotiate agricultural treaties and discuss crop yields. Instead, he'd become part of a Velcrin family, challenged a draconian ambassador, and apparently demonstrated something fundamental about human nature to the entire Galactic Council. The human common area was still full when he entered. Patricia, Dr. Webb, Sarah, and half a dozen other humans were waiting for him. So, Patricia said, a smile breaking across her usually serious face, the famous cub whisperer returns. James groaned. Please don't start calling me that. Too late, Dr. Webb said cheerfully. It's already spreading through the station. The human who wouldn't move. You're a legend now. I just sat on a couch. You sat on a couch for over an hour with alien babies sleeping on you, triggering a station-wide emergency because you didn't want to disturb them, Sarah corrected. That's the most aggressively human thing anyone has ever done in space. You've basically become a walking example of everything that makes our species weird to everyone else. Is that good or bad? Patricia considered the question seriously. I think it's good. The galaxy's been trying to figure out what makes humans special. We're not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most advanced. But maybe what we bring to the Council isn't physical advantages or technological superiority. Maybe it's something simpler. The ability to care about things that aren't ours, to form bonds that don't make strategic sense, to sit still when logic says to move, because trust matters more than comfort. The Draconians won't see it that way, James said. No. Patricia agreed. They'll see it as a vulnerability. They'll test it, probe it, try to use it against us. But here's the thing, James, they tested it today. They put you in front of the Council, tried to make you look foolish, tried to paint human emotion as weakness. And you know what happened? A warrior species that's older than human civilization, that's built an empire on strength and military might, stood up and defended you, because you showed their cubs simple kindness. She leaned forward. That's not a weakness, James. That's a kind of power they don't understand yet. And maybe, just maybe, it's exactly what the galaxy needs right now. Dr. Webb raised his coffee cup. To Ambassador Chen, the man who prevented an interstellar incident by being too polite to disturb a nap. The others raised their cups in agreement, and despite his embarrassment, James found himself smiling. He thought about Mira and Kess, about their unconditional trust, about Ambassador Krelnax's words, about the medallion now hanging around his neck. Perhaps the humans were strange. Perhaps their emotions did make them unpredictable. Perhaps caring about cute things and forming bonds across species lines didn't make logical sense. But as James sat among his friends, thinking about the day's events, he realized something important. Being human meant caring about things that couldn't be calculated, forming bonds that couldn't be explained, and making choices that logic couldn't justify. It meant sitting still when every rational thought said to move, because a small creature trusted you enough to sleep in your presence. And if that made humans strange to the rest of the galaxy, then James thought, maybe strange wasn't such a bad thing to be. In the Velcrin quarters, Ambassador Krell Nax watched her cubs sleep, curled together in their nest of cushions. Today they had taught her a lesson about trust. Tomorrow she would begin the process of helping the Galactic Council understand that lesson too. The humans were unpredictable. The humans were emotional. The humans made choices that defied logic. But perhaps, she thought, that was exactly why they had a place at the council table. Perhaps the galaxy needed a species that measured value in ways that couldn't be quantified, that formed bonds that couldn't be explained, that chose kindness over calculation. Her cubs stirred in their sleep, making soft chirping sounds. They were dreaming, perhaps of the human who had held them so carefully, who had honored their trust so completely. They had chosen well, her instincts told her, and if cubs' instincts could be trusted, if they truly saw with the heart before the eyes, then perhaps the humans would prove to be exactly what the galaxy needed. Strange, yes. Unpredictable, certainly. But also kind. Genuinely kind. In ways that transcended species and logic and strategic calculation, and in a galaxy that often valued strength above all else. Perhaps that kind of strength, the quiet strength of simple compassion, was the most powerful force of all. The cubs slept on, peaceful and secure, dreaming whatever dreams come to those who have learned that the universe can be trusted, at least sometimes, at least when the right beings are watching over them. And across the station, in dozens of quarters belonging to dozens of species, ambassadors and delegates and observers thought about what they had witnessed and wondered what it might mean for the future of the Galactic Council. The humans had arrived among the stars with their strange customs and emotional reasoning, and slowly, one unexpected incident at a time, they were teaching the galaxy that there were different kinds of strength, different kinds of wisdom, different kinds of courage. Sometimes courage meant fighting, sometimes it meant negotiating, and sometimes it simply meant sitting very still, honoring the trust of a sleeping child, and refusing to break that trust, no matter the cost. That was humanity. That was what they brought to the stars, and the galaxy, whether it knew it yet or not, would never be quite the same.